In this lesson, we'll talk about using the multi-map exporter to speed up our workflow as far as getting out textures and also our mesh. So in ZBrush, we'll often want to export texture maps from our polypaint or normal maps or our mesh itself to get out of ZBrush. And so traditionally we could do this by coming in to our subtool, and if it has a number of subtools, we have each individual subtool. We want to make sure that the subtool itself has UVs. And then if it's poly painted, then we can come in under texture map and we can go ahead and, let's say, create new from poly paint, and we can create a new texture. Okay, you can see the texture here. We can change the size and so forth. But if we have a number of subtools and we have a number of different even texture maps as far as the UV tiles, if you've got a multi-tile setup on your UVs, then it can be a little bit tedious and a lot of just clicks to get that out of ZBrush. So what the multi-map exporter will do is just automate a lot of that. So we'll go ahead and go into Z plugin, multi-map exporter, and at the beginning you're presented with a list, and we actually have some training on this that goes into a little bit more depth, but we'll just kind of cover getting this out. So you can select the kind of map that you want. So if you want to create a displacement, you want to create a normal map, you want to create texture from polypaint, so it'll go ahead and calculate that. You want to create maybe ambient occlusion, and then you also want to export the mesh. So you can basically just click everything that you want to actually export. You can decide whether you want to export maps for the visible subtools. So you can see, turn that on and off. So I can export it for everything that's visible, which speeds things up. If you have things that are supposed to be on the same map, you can tell it to merge the maps. You can change the map size here. There's some presets in here, but you can also come in and change that to anything that you like. There's a map border. You can flip the maps vertically, okay? And then there are options here at the bottom for all of the different exports. So we can go to file names, and this will allow us to decide, okay, the displacement map is going to have this kind of a suffix, the vector displacement, this kind of a suffix, and so forth. This is how the tiles are going to be formatted. They're going to be, the U is going to be here, and then followed by underscore, and then the V number. So, you know, 01, 02, or whatever your tile is. And then you can choose the 16-bit format and 18-bit format and so forth. So you can go ahead and get out of there. Okay, if you have a morph target, you can switch. You can estimate how long it's going to take, and then you have settings for each of these individual maps. So you can go into your displacement map, change some of the settings that you have here, go into your normal map. Let's say I want it to be tangent. You can select tangent, a tangent normal map in there. I'll turn off adaptive. Go into your ambient occlusion. You've got a bunch of different options in here for changing how those are set up. And so what you can do is set up an export, and then once you've got all the settings just like you like them, you can go ahead and save that as a preset. Okay, so then at any time you can load that up and redo your export. Okay, for the mesh export, we can decide what level we want to export this mesh at. If we want to export quads, and you'll notice these values are similar to your import-export settings in your tool palette as well. Okay, so once you've got everything set the way that you like, you can go ahead and say create all maps. This is where we're going to tell it where we actually want to put everything. So it's going to bring up a dialog. Let's go ahead and jump up here, and I'm just going to create a new folder. I'll call it multi-map. Let's go ahead and jump in here, and then I'm going to go ahead and just call this Wolf, and let's go ahead and save. All right, so now it's going to go through, and you're going to get an indication here. It's going to show you the UV tile. Right now, we're looking at the normal map being created for the first tile. And so it's going to go through ambient occlusion tool, and so you can modify all of that. Okay, now we're looking at a normal map for the U1 V0 tile for the same subtool. So on the same subtool, working on a different UV tile, working on ambient occlusion. See what it's going to get to next. All right, it's moved on to the eyes. Now we're working on ambient occlusion, displacement, normal. Those are all going really, really fast. The TM texture map. Okay, now we're back down all the way to the trousers, working on displacement, normal U1, V1 tile. Okay, so over 1, up 1. All right, so once it has created all the maps and exported the geometry, it's going to give you a little indicator here. All maps created and exported, and it took 2 minutes and 28 seconds. So we exported, just by a couple of clicks, we exported multiple displacement maps over multiple subtools and multiple UV tiles. Same thing with normal maps, texture maps, ambient occlusion, and also the meshes. And we're talking about 4 different subtools, so your mesh could have a number of, multiple of this, 12, 24, 100 subtools. And you could have multiple maps that you want to get from that. In addition to that, you could have multiple UV tiles for each subtool. So you're talking about a lot of different files that need to be created. We did it very quickly using the Multimap Exporter. Let's go ahead and take a look at that folder. So here's that folder that we just created, and you can see that we have the geometry here and here and here. We have the ambient occlusion maps, and you can see that they're named based on the UV tile. So here's one for Wolf 10 Begin, so that's the main body. Here's another one, displacement maps, normal map for the teeth and the trousers, color maps for the eyes, color for the body. You can see there's 2 tiles there for the body. And for the pants, you can see the tiles. Okay, so it's output all of these images, which we can then reassemble in whatever application we happen to be using, Maya or whatever it is. But just with a couple of clicks, selecting some things. And then the great thing is, if we need to do this again, we can go back in, reload our settings, our preset here that we've saved out, and do all of that again just by doing a couple clicks, waiting a couple of minutes for it to go through that process, work on something else while it's doing it, and then come back in, and all of our maps and geometry has been exported. So another great way to kind of speed up your workflow is to use this Multimap Exporter when you're trying to get out a number of different maps for your different subtools. So make sure to check that out. Okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about is just a couple of tips when working with subtools in selecting subtools, making them visible, and then also repeating deformations on subtools. So we'll talk about that in the next lesson.